My son looked me in the eye and said, "Stop eating so much. You don't earn it anymore." And just like that, a lifetime of love, labor, and loyalty vanished like steam off a boiling pot. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, but I did something he never saw coming. This isn't a revenge story with fists or fire. It's one built on memory, paper, and the silent power of a woman who refuses to be erased. My name is Marjorie Ellis. I'm 70 years old, and I've spent most of my life doing the same three things: teaching kids, raising one, and running a little grocery shop at the edge of Boise, Idaho. Back in the 80s, it was just me and Richard, my late husband. He was a bus driver with a quiet laugh and calloused hands. I was a third-grade teacher who clipped coupons and baked blueberry muffins on Sunday mornings. We didn't have much, but we had this wild, stubborn dream: open a small neighborhood store where people could buy bread, aspirin, and kindness in the same aisle. It started with a beat-up storefront on Oak Ridge Avenue. The walls peeled paint. The floor creaked. But we painted it yellow ourselves and named it Ellis Market. I still remember the first sale we ever made. An old man bought a pack of chewing gum and told Richard he liked the smell of wood polish in the air. We laughed all night over that. We worked side by side every single day after school. I taught math until 3 p.m. and stocked canned beans until 9 p.m. After Richard passed 5 years ago now, it was just me. I didn't know how to breathe in the house without his coffee boiling at dawn, so I stayed at the shop. It kept me alive more than I kept it alive. People called me a fixture. Kids I once taught now came in with babies on their hips and called me Miss Marjorie. I knew what brands their mothers used to buy. I remembered who hated tomatoes and who snuck lollipops when their parents weren't looking. Then one day, my son Lucas walked in, a Bluetooth in one ear and a coffee he didn't make himself in the other. "Mom," he said, "you need to rest. Let me take over the store. You've done enough." I looked at him, this man I raised through scraped knees and midnight fevers, and I believed him. I believed he meant well, that he saw what I had built and wanted to honor it. So I said yes. We signed the paperwork in the back office next to the old jar of pens that never worked and the receipt printer that jammed every Monday. He took over operations. I kept the land title in my name, something Richard and I had always agreed on. Keep the land, and you'll never be pushed off your feet. I told Lucas I'd still come in a few days a week. Not to hover, just to help. He smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "Whatever makes you happy, Mom." For a while, it did. I still arranged the soup cans in pyramid stacks. I still wrote the specials in chalk, my handwriting crooked from arthritis but still legible enough. People smiled when they saw me behind the counter. A teenager even asked, "Are you the owner?" I smiled and said, "I helped build it." But little by little, things shifted. He replaced the wooden sign Richard carved with a steel logo. The hand-labeled jam jars disappeared, replaced by bulk stock from wholesalers. He hired new staff, young, fast, didn't know the customers by name. One of them, her name was Brittany, once handed me a mop and said, "The boss wants the back room cleaned before lunch." The boss. My son. I laughed it off. Thought maybe I misheard. Maybe she didn't know. But it stuck with me. Something had changed, and not just the layout of the store. Lucas no longer asked me to help. He expected it. And when I wasn't there on a Wednesday because I'd twisted my ankle in the garden, he texted, "We were slammed today. Wish you'd told me you weren't coming." Wish I'd told him? Still, I showed up the next morning sore and slower than usual. I brewed the coffee, set the bread rack, smiled at customers. Because that's what mothers do. We keep giving, even when it's never asked for, even when it stops being acknowledged. I didn't see it yet, not fully, but something inside me was beginning to understand. They will take everything you give if you never ask them to see it. And in that silence, where gratitude should have lived, I began to disappear. The thing about small shifts is they don't start with earthquakes. They start with a single glance that lingers too long, a thanks that never comes, or a sentence that cuts sharper than you expect. For me, it started with a bowl of soup and a loaf of day-old bread. It was a slow Thursday. The store was quiet. Lucas had just returned from a vendor meeting, talking loud into his Bluetooth like he was pitching to Wall Street instead of ordering toilet paper and canned peaches. I was in the break room spooning some leftover chicken noodle soup into a paper bowl. Lucas walked in mid-call, glanced at my lunch, and as he ended the call, he said, "Maybe ease up on the food, Mom. You're not exactly covering payroll these days." Just like that. Like he was talking to a stray cat who wandered in and ate too much kibble. I froze, spoon halfway to my mouth. I couldn't even form words. Just set the bowl down and stood there, nodding like a waitress who got the order wrong. That night, I lay awake in my twin bed, staring at the ceiling fan. I thought about all the times I'd packed his school lunches, sometimes forgetting mine. The birthday cakes I stayed up baking, even when I had a parent-teacher conference the next day. And now, at 70, I had to earn my right to eat soup? That's when it started to burn. Low, deep, like coals left from a fire long thought dead. The following week, I came in as usual, 7 a.m. sharp, but everything had changed. There was a new logo above the register, a plaque with Lucas Ellis, owner and operator, below it. The schedule board had my name written not in blue like before, but in light gray marker, like an afterthought. I wasn't Mom in the store anymore. I was Marjorie. One of the new girls, Kendra, maybe 22 at most, walked up to me with a clipboard and said cheerfully, "Hi, Miss Marjorie. Lucas asked if you could clean out the back fridge before the inspector comes. Oh, and mop the back hallway?" I smiled, nodded, said nothing. But inside I whispered, "I started this place when your parents were still learning how to write cursive." Lucas stopped calling me co-founder or even the reason we exist. He introduced me to vendors as my mom she likes to help around. One of them laughed and said, "Free labor, smart move." Lucas laughed along. I didn't. I kept showing up. I kept working. But each day I felt less like someone who built the walls and more like someone who wiped them down. Then came the spreadsheet. It was taped to the cooler room door, color-coded, organized. Weekly task assignments. At the bottom of the list, Marjorie Ellis, stockroom, mop duties, expired inventory, light trash runs. There was no mention of the word mother. No hint of what I once was. You know, if you've ever spent your life building something from the ground up, be it a business, a home, or a family, you know the pain isn't when they forget to say thank you. The pain is when they act like you were never even there. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been made to feel like you've outlived your usefulness? Like the more you give, the less you matter. If you have, I want you to tell me down below. I may not know your name, but I promise. I know how that feels. By the end of the month, I didn't sit at the front counter anymore. My old stool was gone. So was the chalkboard where I used to write today's thought. Little quotes I loved. Like, kindness is free. Sprinkle that stuff everywhere. Gone. Wiped clean. Now there were digital screens and price match alerts, efficient, cold, unrecognizable. Then one afternoon, I overheard Lucas on the phone, talking to someone about overhead costs. He said, "She eats here every day, uses supplies, takes up space. I've let her stay out of guilt, honestly. She doesn't really help anymore." I didn't move. I just stood in the hallway behind the utility shelf, holding a roll of receipt tape like it was the only thing keeping me upright. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen of my little rental house, flipping through an old binder. Receipts, photos, a napkin Richard had once scribbled our first budget plan on. I kept asking myself, when did I go from founder to freeloader? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew this, something had to change, not with him, with me. Because they were never going to hand back what they took. I had to take it back myself. They didn't fire me. They didn't yell. No one slammed a door or threw a tantrum. But somehow, I disappeared. The moment I knew I was gone wasn't some big dramatic scene. It was a Tuesday. Bright, dry air. I walked into the shop like always, 8:10 a.m., 15 minutes early. That's how Richard and I always ran it. Early meant respect. Except this time, the door chime had been replaced. Instead of that warm little bell we bought at a flea market in '92, it was some kind of digital beep. It sounded like a scanner, not a welcome. The chalkboard was gone. My stool behind the register? gone. The cozy shelf where I kept my old receipt binder and thermos of tea, replaced with a barcode gun and a wireless charging pad. It was like the store had been scrubbed of anything that remembered me. Lucas didn't look up when I walked in. He was standing behind the counter, laughing with Kendra and a vendor guy I didn't recognize. They were joking about TikToks and shelf redesigns. I said, "Morning." He nodded without turning. "Yeah. Hey." Then the vendor guy asked, "So you run this place all by yourself?" Lucas replied, "Pretty much. My wife helps with some admin. We streamlined everything since we took over. Used to be kind of old school." That hit me like a punch wrapped in velvet. Used to be, we took over, as if I'd never been part of it, as if the store raised itself. Later that day, a customer, Marta, a sweet woman who's been coming since we opened, walked in and waved at me. She smiled and said, "You still here, Miss Marjorie? You're the heart of this place." Before I could say a word, Lucas called out from across the aisle, "Marta! Oh, she's just here to visit. She retired last year." I didn't even blink, just smiled like it was true, nodded like I'd forgotten what retired even meant. At lunch, I went to the back to eat a sandwich I'd brought from home. No more soup, no more helping myself to anything in the fridge. I'd learned that lesson. While I ate, I heard Lucas in the front on a call. "Yeah, she's still around sometimes. Kind of hard to say no, you know. It's like legacy guilt, but she's not in charge. Just likes to feel included." Legacy guilt. I stared at my sandwich like it was something I didn't recognize, like I hadn't made it, like I didn't deserve to eat it. That night at home, I sat at my kitchen table in silence. I pulled out a photo from the bottom drawer, me and Richard standing in front of the shop the day we hung the hand-painted wooden sign. He was holding the hammer. I had the brush. We were both laughing. It hit me then. No one knows that story now. No one left in that store knows who built what, who swept the floors when there were no employees, who put in 18-hour days unpaid because the numbers just didn't work that week. They'd replaced my labor with silence, my history with their narrative. And it worked because I let them. I stopped correcting people when they thought Lucas founded the shop. I stopped speaking up when new hires assumed I was just some old friend who helped out. Because speaking up made me feel desperate. And desperate is one thing I promised I'd never be. A few days later, something strange happened. Lucas left a printout on the break room table, a proposal for a rebrand. At the top of the page, repositioning Ellis Market for Gen Z retail. The second page had a line item, Phase 3, complete separation from legacy identity, phase out Ellis family story in public materials. That was it. That was the moment I knew. I'd been erased. I walked out without saying goodbye. Didn't clock out, didn't leave a note, just went home, sat on my porch, and watched the sun drop behind my neighbor's rooftops like it had done every night without asking who was watching. I thought, this is what they mean by losing yourself piece by piece. Not all at once, but like someone sanding down the edges of your name until it doesn't sound like yours anymore. I didn't cry, not that night. But I did open the bottom drawer again, this time not for pictures, but for the land deed, that little folded square of paper that said the ground beneath that store still had my name on it. Lucas had the shelves, the point-of-sale system, the interns, and the brand vision. But the dirt under the tile? The foundation? That still belonged to me. I didn't call Lucas. I didn't call the store. I called a boy I once taught to multiply by threes. His name is David Kim, and when he was 8 years old, he gave me a crumpled piece of paper that said, "You're my favorite math wizard." Now he's 42, a district councilman, and the reason I still believe teaching changes lives. I hadn't spoken to him in over a decade, but when I left a message on his office line, he called back that evening. "Miss Marjorie," he said, voice shocked and warm, "I thought about you last week. I still divide the tip the way you taught me, 10% first, double it." I laughed for the first time in what felt like months. Told him I needed to ask a favor, not money, just a meeting. He said, "Anytime." We sat in a quiet booth of a coffee shop off 5th Street. I brought a manila folder with yellowing edges, the original land deed to Ellis Market, tucked inside with a copy of our first lease, handwritten notes from Richard, and a little photo of him in front of the shop holding a grand opening sign. David scanned the papers in silence, his expression tightening with every page. Then he looked up. "You still own the land?" I nodded. "But your son doesn't know?" I shook my head. David leaned back, exhaled long through his nose. "Miss Marjorie, you're sitting on the fuse. He built his empire on your foundation, and he doesn't even realize the ground he's standing on doesn't belong to him." I stared at the ceramic cup in front of me, my tea gone cold. What should I do? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "That depends. Do you want to burn it down or build something new with it?" That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, cradling Richard's old cardigan. It still smelled like cedar chips and aftershave. Even after all these years, I whispered, "They erased you, Jim. They erased us. They took what we built and acted like it never mattered." And I realized it wasn't just about the store. It wasn't even about Lucas. It was about me, about the slow, quiet betrayal of a lifetime of giving. Never thinking it would be used against me, I had raised a child who saw my usefulness as conditional, who thought that the minute I stopped producing, I stopped mattering. That kind of forgetting, that wasn't just neglect, that was erasure. I opened the manila folder again, read every document twice, felt every signature like a pulse. The store stood because of us, because of years of back pain and late nights and counting pennies by flashlight during power outages. And he, my son, had the nerve to call me legacy guilt. The next day, I got on a city bus and rode out to the county records office. The clerk at the desk looked about 12 and asked if I needed help filing something for my parents' property. I smiled politely and said, "No, honey, it's mine, all of it." I requested a full copy of the land title, notarized, updated, filed a request to terminate the usage contract. Lucas would get the notice in 2 weeks, not a second sooner. When I got home that night, I sat on the porch and let the sun set slow across my hands. They were swollen, stiff, knuckles like knobs, nails uneven. But they were still my hands, the ones that had built, written, stirred, wiped, held. I held the papers like they were holy, not because of what they were, but because of what they proved. I hadn't disappeared. They just stopped looking. I didn't call Lucas, didn't tell him what I'd done. I just stopped showing up at the store. When he finally called 3 days later, his voice was all tension wrapped in forced calm. "Hey, Mom, you okay? Haven't seen you. Thought we'd talk about the Q4 calendar." I said I'd been busy, didn't elaborate. He never mentioned the deed, but I knew it was coming. That weekend, I bought a fresh journal, the leather kind with thick pages. I wrote one sentence at the top of the first page. "They don't get to define what you're worth just because they forgot what you gave." Then I underlined it, twice. The legal notice hit his desk on a Wednesday. I know because that was the day the wind picked up early. Like the air itself knew something was shifting. Lucas didn't call me right away. He waited a whole day. And when he finally did, his voice cracked at the edges, like a man used to control who just realized the steering wheel wasn't his anymore. "Mom, what's this?" "The lease is being terminated? You're evicting me?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I simply said, "You've had a good run, Lucas, but the land's mine. It always has been." There was silence on the other end, then a frustrated sigh, like I disappointed him. Imagine that. He was disappointed in me for finally standing up. He said something about legacy, about family, about how this isn't how we do things. But I remembered how he had done things, how he erased my name, how he turned my labor into obligation, how he made me feel like an afterthought in a building I built with my own bare hands. "I'm not angry, Lucas," I said. "I'm just finished." I didn't return to the store, not when the notice was delivered, not when the customers started asking where Miss Marjorie had gone, not even when Lucas left messages with that panicked tone that says, "I thought she'd never really do it." because that's what people like him count on. They count on our silence, our patience, our fear of conflict. They think we won't choose ourselves. But I did. I chose to sell, not for revenge, not to punish, but to let it go, so I could finally begin again. The buyer was someone David had introduced me to, a former student of mine, now running a cooperative grocery network that partnered with local women-owned farms. Her name was Camille, 37, bright and kind in a way that didn't feel performative. When I told her I was selling, she didn't haggle, didn't try to lowball. She said, "Miss Marjorie, I know what this place is. It's not just square footage, it's a seed. I want to grow it right." We signed the papers 2 weeks later, $190,000, all wired to an account with only my name on it. Lucas didn't attend the closing, but he sent a text. If you needed money, you could have just asked. I didn't respond, because he still didn't get it. It wasn't about money. It was about being seen, being valued, not having to earn the right to exist in something I created. A week later, I made an appointment at the Community Foundation office. The receptionist asked what kind of legacy gift I wanted to create. I said I wanted to start a scholarship for the daughters of single mothers, for the kids whose grandmothers raised them while working 2 jobs, for the quiet ones who always say thank you when no one else hears them. We called it the Richard and Marjorie Ellis Fund, because Richard deserved to be remembered too. And because our love created more than a business, it created space. I didn't keep a dime for myself. I paid off the last of my home loan, donated the rest. I didn't need more. What I needed was peace. People talk about reinvention like it's this big flashy thing, but mine was quiet. I bought a secondhand sewing machine. I started volunteering at a reading group for 3rd graders. I grew tomatoes in pots lined up like soldiers along my back fence. I took up knitting again, made uneven scarves and gave them away at the library. No one applauded, no one clapped. But for the first time in years, I felt warm without asking permission. One afternoon, I saw Lucas outside the new store. He looked thinner, maybe tired. He didn't see me across the street, but I watched as he hesitated at the front door, then walked past. Maybe it hurt too much to walk inside. Maybe it reminded him of a version of me he can't control anymore. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt finished, like a song that found its last note. 3 weeks after the scholarship fund launched, I got a letter in the mail. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, just my name, handwritten in shaky ballpoint ink. Inside was a folded piece of lined paper, the kind you find in the bottom of a school backpack, soft at the corners. The handwriting was crooked and honest. It read, "Dear Miss Marjorie, my mom cried when she heard I got the scholarship. She said no one ever helped us before. I don't know you, but I promise I'll make you proud. Thank you for seeing kids like me. Love, L.E.T." That was it. Just that. And I held that little letter against my chest like it weighed 100 pounds, because in 3 sentences, that girl gave me what I'd waited years to hear. You mattered. I didn't show anyone the letter, didn't frame it or post it online, but I reread it every night before bed for a week straight. It stayed folded in the front of my journal, next to the page that said, "They don't get to define what you're worth just because they forgot what you gave." The store reopened under its new name that summer, the Corner Collective, Homegrown Goods, powered by women. Camille invited me to the opening. I told her I didn't need a seat up front, didn't need a microphone or a plaque on the wall. I just wanted to stand in the back and watch it live again. So that's what I did. I wore Richard's cardigan and a red scarf I knitted myself. I stood behind the last row of folding chairs, leaning slightly on a cane I only used when the breeze turned sharp, and I watched people laugh, shop, sip coffee from biodegradable cups. No one recognized me, but I recognized myself. Camille spotted me from across the room and gave a small nod. That was enough. After the crowd left, she walked over, handed me a small box. Inside was a wooden sign, hand-carved like the one Richard and I had made all those years ago. It said, "The Ellis Bench, for rest, reflection, and remembering, in honor of those who planted first." I couldn't speak, just touched the grain of the wood and nodded. It was more than a tribute. It was proof. Someone remembered. Back at home, my days were quiet again, but not empty. The tomatoes bloomed full and red. I started teaching knitting at the library on Saturdays. The children's section asked me to read aloud once a month. I didn't need a calendar anymore to feel useful. I didn't need someone else's approval to feel like I was still alive. One morning, I passed by a mirror and barely recognized the woman in it. Not because I looked old, but because I looked at peace. Not smiling for someone, not pretending to be smaller than I was, just present, just me. Lucas never came to see me, not after the sale, not after the foundation, not after the letter went public in the local newspaper, but he sent flowers on my birthday. Tulips, my favorite. There was no card, and that was all right. Some things don't need words. Some forgiveness comes not from reunion, but from letting go of who they'll never be. I didn't win back my son. I didn't get the apology I once dreamed of. But I got something better. Myself, whole, seen, free. On the front porch of my little house, there's a rocking chair and a tin box of seed packets. There's also a mug with a crack in it and the words, "Best Mom Ever," printed in faded blue. Lucas gave it to me in the 4th grade, long before he knew how to hurt me. I still drink from it, not because it's true for him, but because it's still true for me. If you're a mother, a grandmother, or someone who's ever been made to feel invisible after all you gave, I see you. I wrote this story for us, for every woman who was told she was too much when she gave everything. For those who stayed quiet so long, they forgot the sound of their own name. Let me ask you honestly, have you ever felt erased by someone you loved? Would you have walked away like I did, or stayed, hoping they'd change? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters. You still matter. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you it's never too late to take yourself back.